Okay, so Grappler Baki is a manga and anime series ostensibly about a young man training in martial arts in order to defeat his father. But in reality, it's an absurdist chronicle of grotesquely muscled men who seek to become physically powerful beyond the scope of human imagination.
Is he even human?
Which one? The yellow giant or the monster in the thong?
I see you're finally awake, huh? And it looks like you're finally ready to fight.
This show is insane. People have their faces literally caved in by roundhouse kicks. Men swallow handfuls of bullets that go off in their mouths. People vomit up explosives they were storing inside their bodies in the middle of a fight. You get the idea. Now, Grappler Baki the manga has been going for about 30 years, but a recent Netflix adaptation means a ton of new people are coming to the show who had never heard of it before. People like me. The manga, and by extension the anime, is drawn with the kind of obsession with extreme, beautifully disgusting muscled bodies that only a fan of bodybuilding could have. And some of the character backstories are so outlandish, they'd make Vince McMahon blush. The creator of Grappler Baki, a guy named Keisuke Itigaki, is obviously someone who is steeped in the culture of not just martial arts and fighting, on which this anime is obviously based, but pro wrestling and bodybuilding as well. And as someone who holds those two cultural institutions in very high regard myself, I got a lot of pleasure out of watching how Itigaki communicates this love to people through the show. Now, at this point, I think we can safely say that just the way Itigaki illustrates the human body is a reference to bodybuilding in and of itself. I mean, just look at the way he draws his characters. They're like walking anatomy charts. That is, if your anatomy chart injected anabolics into its ass 2 times a week. But probably the most specific and overt reference to the world of bodybuilding is the character of Biscuit Oliva, or Mr. Oliver as he's known in the English dub. And yes, his first name is Biscuit. Don't ask.
He's huge. And not an ounce of fat on him either. The man is a towering mountain of pure muscle. The name's Oliver.
Now, I want to say that Biscuit Oliva is a reference to Sergio Oliva, the famous bodybuilding champion of the 60s and 70s. But Biscuit isn't so much a reference to Sergio, he just is Sergio. Now, for those of you who aren't up on your bodybuilding lore, Sergio Oliva was pretty much Arnold Schwarzenegger's first anime nemesis in the world of bodybuilding. He was Mr. Olympia before Arnold in the late 1960s, and he was massive.
A former Mr. World, a former Mr. Universe, a 3-time Mr. Olympia, he's known as the Myth, Sergio Oliva!
Nicknamed the Myth, Sergio Oliva's most recognizable feature were his massive arms, particularly his forearms. He also had huge wide lats, which are those muscles that make bodybuilders look like walking triangles, and those, along with his narrow waist, gave him the perfect shape for a bodybuilder. Now, there's this whole story here about the guys who ran the Mr. Olympia contest, the Weirdo brothers, trying to do everything they possibly could to make Arnold Schwarzenegger their new champion and get rid of Sergio. But that's a tale for another video. Point is, Sergio was a great champion. He had incredible genetics and he was a tough guy to beat. Nonetheless, Arnold did it in 1970, which started his run of 6 consecutive Mr. Olympias, his road to movie stardom, eventual political success, blah, 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 blah. Anyways, back to Grappler Baki. The similarities between Sergio Oliva and Biscuit Oliva should be pretty damn obvious. I mean, just look at them. Aside from the fact they share the same last name, both characters are massively muscular, wide individuals who aren't always the tallest guys in the room. Both are Cuban nationals living in the United States, both sport the same pencil mustache, and both are known specifically for their arms. They even have the same hairline. Biscuit even sports a pair of extremely tiny bodybuilding trunks during his fight with a guy named Shoten Ron in the Rai Tai tournament arc. It does get a little weirder though. See, there's this one scene in the anime where Biscuit is able to withstand point-blank hits from a shotgun, saying that his muscles are so massive and so tough, they're essentially bulletproof.
Looks like you should have brought a bigger gun.
Turns out the real-life Sergio Oliva is also impervious to bullets. In 1986, his then-wife shot him in the abdomen, just like in the anime, and he seems to have pretty much shrugged it off after a quick trip to the hospital. In Baki, Biscuit Oliva doesn't really know any martial arts. He relies on his brute strength and pure muscle power to get the W in a fight, which honestly is exactly how you'd expect a professional bodybuilder to act if they were just dropped into a combat situation.
Face it, you're just not smart enough.
And then there's Kanji Igari, aka Antonio Igari, who is the anime double of real-life pro wrestling legend Antonio Inoki. Once again, if you get the reference, the similarities are easy to spot. Both men are aging wrestlers turned promoters who have a penchant for fine tailored suits and sport chins that could probably cut concrete. Both of them cut imposing physical figures even into middle age, both have a serious interest in legitimate martial arts beyond pro wrestling, and both guys fight dirty. Oh, and the real-life Antonio Inoki's birth name? Kanji Inoki. Come on.
Kanji Igari, charismatic pro wrestling superstar. Baki eliminated him in the third round of the Maximum tournament.
Now, Antonio Inoki himself is a fascinating figure, and his true-to-life backstory is so incredible, it wouldn't be out of place even in Grappler Baki. He became a massive star in the 1970s, starting his own pro wrestling organization after a failed hostile takeover of the one he started in. He fought Muhammad Ali in 1972. He performed for the biggest pro wrestling crowd in history in North Korea with Ric Flair. He became an elected politician in Japan and, get this, negotiated the release of Japanese hostages during the First Gulf War from Saddam Hussein. I swear to God, that all actually happened. And in Grappler Baki, the character of Kanji Inoki is basically the perfect representation of how a heel wrestler would behave if wrestling were real, which in Baki, it basically is.
After all, this guy's supposed to be on death row, right? We could kill him and nobody would even care. Nice shooting, boss.
He plots, he schemes, he psychs out his opponents, he lords his status over others at expensive dinners while wearing high thread count suits. And when he's got no options left, he begs, pleads, and cries for mercy.
You win, all right? I can't compete with your power or your stamina, or your speed, or your cunning, or your toughness, or any of it! Look, I know it's asking a lot, but let me go, will you? Please, you've got to let me live.
One of the deeper cut references to Antonio Inoki in Baki involves a technique that he used in his real-life fight with Muhammad Ali. See, there's this episode in the anime where Yujiro Hanma, who is basically the world's strongest, most badass man, comes face to face with Muhammad Ali Jr. To make a point, Yujiro counters Ali's boxing style by flopping on the floor and literally just lying on his back.
This is the Ali Igari stance. You might be surprised to hear this,
But ever since it was created, not one fighter has been able to deal with it effectively.
Without context, this seems bizarre. That is, until you go back and you watch Ali versus Inoki. See, due to a last-minute rule change from Inoki's camp, he was allowed to kick at Muhammad Ali while he was lying on the ground. And that's exactly what he did for almost the entire fight. At the time, the Ali-Inoki fight was seen as a bit of a farce. But in Baki, Itigaki turns the reason for that into something dripping with esoteric deadliness. It goes from a joke to a badass secret technique for which there is no counter in the boxing world. And this is emblematic of what I really love about Grappler Baki. Itigaki takes things from real life that don't seem particularly credible, that are undervalued or underwhelming, and he makes them something special. The sum total of Grappler Baki is undoubtedly a unique show, but all the little parts that make it up are like beautiful tributes to these different worlds, to fighting, to bodybuilding, to pro wrestling, and more.